Welcome to Arts Plus Change, hosted by the University of Rochester's Institute for the Performing Arts in partnership with the Office of Equity and Inclusion, the Paul J. Burgett Intercultural Center, 540 West Main, Create a Space Now, and the Rochester Fringe Festival. My name is Erica Fee, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm your conference host for this session called World Dance Representation, Best Practices for the Studio and Classroom. We would like to acknowledge with respect the Seneca Nation, known as the Great Hill People and keepers of the Western Door of the Haudenosaunee. We take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers on whose ancestral lands the University of Rochester currently resides in Rochester, New York, United States. While we have encouraged each presenter to make every effort to create brave and safe space, we would like to encourage you to attend these sessions in the way that you need to attend. While we know that discomfort allows for growth, we would like to remind you that you have agency to make decisions that keep you safe as we embark on potentially difficult content and discussions. As we're all here to learn and grow, we welcome you to challenge ideas, but ask you to agree to challenge the idea and not the person. We also want to remind you that individual presenter views do not necessarily represent the official ideas or beliefs of the University of Rochester, the Institute for the Performing Arts, or its partners. In order to enable live transcription in your Zoom view, please click the arrow to the right of the live transcript box to view. That box can be dragged to another location on your screen. We are recording today's session, so please note your spoken written comments and image may be included as well as the transcript. In order to be identified by first name only, to protect your privacy, we invite you to rename your Zoom profile with your first name only and your pronouns if you feel comfortable. Breakout rooms will not be recorded. Because we have back-to-back sessions scheduled, this session will end promptly at its end time. We encourage presenters and participants to share contact information via chat to foster continued discussion and connection when desired. Thank you for joining us. And now I am honored to welcome Megan Taylor Morrison, Ted Samuel, Kara Nepomuceno, and Damilare Edayera, who are presenting World Dance Representation, Best Practices for the Studio and Classroom.
Thanks so much, Erica. And it's an absolute honor to be here with all of you. I know on behalf of all of us, we're excited to share with you some of the things that we've learned about this topic. And there's so much more to learn. So we'll just caveat it there with that we've had experiences, and we hope there'll be a really rich discussion here with all of you as well. So here's what's going to happen over the course of the next, Erica, is it 45 minutes or an hour? Thought it was a full hour.
It is. Oh, that's a great question. I think it's an hour. Missy can probably chime in. I think she has them all memorized.
Yes, you have an hour.
Yes.
Beautiful. We'll use it. So here's the plan for today. We're going to do some introductions. And then we're going to talk about how we know each other. So how did this group of people actually get connected? We'll have a panel discussion, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A. So as we go through the talk, feel free to throw your questions into the chat box, and we'll get to those questions at the end. So whatever your preference is, you can save them, enter them, whatever works. Cool. So I will start off by introducing myself, and then I'll invite Damilare, Kara, and Ted to introduce themselves. My name is Megan Taylor Morrison. I have been a student and instructor of American vernacular jazz dances for about 16 years. I also founded and ran a company called Dance Adventures that did cultural immersion through the arts in Argentina, Brazil, and the Dominican Republic. We led trips there for groups of Americans. And went on to then be the catalyst for a very cool book, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. I'm currently based out of Atlanta, and will probably be moving to some new and exciting city sometime soon. And I'll pass it off to Damilare, and then Damilare, just go ahead and tag your way through the other presenters.
Sure. Thank you, Megan. My name is Damilare Adeyeri, originally from Nigeria, which was where I was born and grew up. I grew up in the music and dance traditions of the Yoruba culture of Nigeria, and I continue to expand that in my learnings when I learned Latin American and Salsa social dancing. I enrich that knowledge when I went into an international master's in dance practice, knowledge and heritage called Coromundus. This is an European Union joint master's degree program that took me to Norway, France, Hungary, and the UK, learning dances that are non-Western dances. So leaning more into decentering Western colonization dances and learning more traditional cultural community-based dances. And Megan and I connected through my experience in Hungary, which is learning the Csárdás and the Messzöségi Kakas, which are like Hungarian male dances. And anyway, so right now I'm based in Tampa, Florida, living with my wife and my daughter, Kiki, and glad to be here. And I'm going to hand that over to Kara.
Thanks, Damilare. Hi, everyone. I'm Kara. My pronouns are she, hers, and it's an honor to participate in this conference, and I acknowledge the Haudenosaunee land on which the University of Rochester stands. As a settler currently in Kumeyaay land, known currently as San Diego, California. So I've had the honor of dancing with a Philippine arts group here on Kumeyaay land for about 5 years. And my experience with this group, Samahan, has taken me to Manila as well on the Chauncey and Asia grant to study the Pangalay method, or the Amobangsa instructional method of Pangalay, back in January 2019. So I currently bring my lessons from dance and from the performing arts into the speaking and writing English classroom as a Chauncey Teaching Fellow at Gajah Mada University. And my priority is really cultivating creative spaces for students to communicate and increase their skills in speaking and writing. I also write for Thinking Dance, which is based in Philadelphia, with the intention of responding to and marking the labor of dancers through writing. So thanks for having me here, and I'll pass it to Ted.
Thank you, Kara. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm so excited to be here, honored to be here. My name is Ted Samuel. I use he, him pronouns, and I am an anthropologist by training. My PhD dissertation was on the social movement of South India's largest transgender community and how they use performance art in order to spread messages about their movement. But I think the reason that I'm actually here is because I'm also an avid performer of Karagattam, also known as Karaham or Karagattam. It is a South Indian folk dance that I studied when I was studying abroad, and then continued to study throughout my career, and actually incorporated it into my research methods as part of my dissertation research. And I think I'll leave it there. Back to you, Megan.
You guys are all so cool. Every time I hear your bios, I'm like, wow, awesome humans. Cool. So I'm just going to share my screen because I'm going to take you guys through a few visual slides. So this is no surprise. This is the title of our presentation here today, and the steps that we're going to go through. So again, we've just done introductions, and now I'm going to talk about how we all know each other. We'll have our panel discussion and then our open Q&A. So as I mentioned in my intro, I founded a company that did cultural immersion through the arts and was called Dance Adventures. And after a few years, my business partner and I decided to go our separate ways, and we ended up closing the company. So it was a really sad time for me, and I decided I wanted to carry on the legacy of the power of cultural immersion through the arts with a book. And the book I named after the company, so Dance Adventures, True Stories About Dancing Abroad. And I realized as we were working on publishing it, that it really had the potential to be part of the change that I wanted to see in the United States. And it had a potential to stand for something in both the arts area and the journalism area that hadn't really been fully embraced in the way that I wanted it to be. And so we really made sure that this book would treat cultures around the world with the respect and the research and the care that we wanted them to have and be treated with. So the book came out on December 1st of 2020. And this is how I met Damilare, Ted, and Kara, and the other authors of the book. Was I started reaching out to people I know saying, hey, who do you know that has an epic story about a time when they've gone abroad to another country and danced? And I didn't just want Americans who had gone abroad. I wanted people that were not American who had gone abroad. And I wanted people from all different backgrounds to really show that this is a universal experience, the way of connecting and learning about ourselves and meeting other people through dance. So, in the end, we had 50% BIPOC contributors to the book. We hired a perspective consultant to look through every single story and give feedback on whether there was empowering language, if there were any microaggressions, if anything needed to be further researched. She really went through everything with a fine-tooth comb. And we also, whenever possible, had mentors from those countries read through the stories. And as you can imagine, the experience was humbling. It pointed out a lot of blind spots at least for me, I'll speak for myself only, in how world dance is represented and other people and other cultures are represented. And there was a lot of rewriting that happened to make sure that we followed with the commitment of the book. So just to give you guys a quick overview so you understand what we were really going for here, we divided the book into 4 sections. And here's Ted in his glory as a Karagattam dancer, and also a woman dancing Pangale, which is the dance that Kara studied. So the first section of the book is about roots. It's people that went back to a location that's tied to their heritage, where they were studying dances, and how it helped them learn more about who their families are, who they are, and their identity. And the second part of the book, this is also from part 1. We had a wonderful woman from Albanese write a story for that section too, Courtney Celeste Spears, and then Makeda Kumazi, who unfortunately was not able to be here today. She's sick, so we're missing her. But keep your eye out. She's up to some cool things. The next section was on finding community. So this was where Damilari's story was, and that's him dancing. And this was all about how when we go abroad and dance, we're able to connect with community or find connections that blossom into friendships, sometimes romantic relationships, sometimes just like a sweet experience of getting to know people from another culture through dance. And then we had an unexpected experiences section of the book, which is about times when dance catalyzed something that otherwise may not have happened. And then finally, these last 2 photos are from the personal development part of the book, which is about how dancing helped people heal old traumas. It helped them really look at their identity in a way that was transformative. It helped them to, cultivate more body positivity. And this was the basis of the book. I'll stop the share. But as I've talked about it, and as I've heard other folks talk about it, a lot of the questions and the conversations we're having are about how we can better share about dances around the world and dances from cultures that don't belong to us. How we can do that in a way that's respectful, intentional, and really celebrates the places from which they're from. So I'm going to go ahead and open up to our panel for the first question. And I want to just hear a little bit more from each of the panelists why this topic of world dance representation matters to you. So Ted, can we start with you?
Sure, absolutely. I think that being able to explore other forms of dance and performance has been important in my life. I grew up in West Virginia, and I probably know every other Indian American who said that they grew up in West Virginia. We're not a huge community. And I have to say that a lot of the dance and performance spaces that were in some way accessible to me, I didn't see myself in them. I was able to, do musical theater. I always took pride in taking a role away from a white person every once in a while. But with that said, none of this actually spoke to me as someone who had a very, performative face and could really move my body, but I just didn't get choreography quite that well, especially when we were all expected to do the same things at the same time. And I just assumed that I was a bad dancer, that, I could be an actor, a comedian, whatever I needed to be. But dance was just always something that I didn't see myself in. And that really changed when I got the chance to go to India and learn other types of art forms, where it's Karagattam, the dance form that I perform, a lot of it is very impromptu. A lot of it is really about, being able to take advantage of a moment. A lot of it is contextual. You're interacting with the audience, you're playing with them. You get to be the comedian, you get to be the buffoon. And this was a style of dance where I could really see myself, use what I do well. And the other part of it is growing up in West Virginia, you don't see a lot of brown people. And then you see Indian people, specifically Tamil people, doing something so beautiful and so masterful and so funny at the same time, sometimes lewd, sometimes, a little bit vulgar. And it was really exciting for me to be a part of that. So for me, looking at other forms of dance is just being able to explore who dance is for, because I never thought dance was for me, but now I do.
Gorgeous. Thank you, Ted. Kara, how about you?
Oh, wow, so much of Ted's experience really resonates with me. And so rather than repeat some of those points, I'll add to that, which is to say, I think world dance representation really matters to me, because it's not only, I not only learned from world dance representation that yes, I have a place in the dance world, that my dancing body matters, and that beyond that, my body matters. That there are folks who dance whose labor goes unattended, and the opportunity to meet them and to learn about their, their incredible knowledge, their ways of seeing the world through movement, changes the way I function in the world as an educator, as a person who writes, as a person who also dances. So Nanette Matilak, who was in the photo you just saw, with the fan and the very long fingers, the fingernails, the jangai, she is a senior member and a founding member of Alun Alun Dance Circle based in Manila. And being able to meet her and learn about her experience of founding Alun Alun with Ligaya Fernando Amobangsa not only helped me learn more about Pangalay, helped me learn more about that dance, and from there learn more about Philippine history, but also learn about the ongoing struggle of Moro groups, predominantly Muslim groups in southern Philippines, and interrogate the ways I was complicit, or interrogate the ways I participated or my family participated in that marginalization, in that displacement. So on the one hand, world dance representation is this beautiful avenue for placing my body in space, stepping into space fully as a person of color, as a second generation Filipino American. And on the other hand, it's also a wonderful way to interrogate the ways I participate in these ongoing structures of displacement, of oppression, even within the Philippines. So I can't just say, I'm a Filipino American, I get to take whatever I want and participate in whatever dance is associated with that nation, with that archipelago. I get to look critically and think about the ways that movement not only informs the way I show up, but the way that other groups, especially religious minorities, ethnic minorities in the archipelago, move across space, across borders, and even within southern Philippines.
Thank you. And Damilari, how about for you?
Sure, thank you, Megan. And world dance representation is important to me because of the idea of roots, like cultural roots and nomenclature. So how we name and refer to these dances. I think my most poignant experience was when I first came to the US and I heard things like African dance or West African dance. And I imagined what part of the continent, what country, what culture, what community, what dance are we talking about? And the more I learned about the drumming and dance traditions starting in the US, I realized, okay, when they talk about West African dance, it's actually more like dances from like Cote d'Ivoire or like Mali and the Mende tribes and the djembe drums. But then what about the whole other part of the continent and even of West Africa? And for me, being from Nigeria and the Bata dance, when I hear Bata dance, it tends to lean more on the Afro-Cuban dances and the bata traditions, which actually was from the history of the slaves or the enslaved that were taken from West Africa and Ghana to Cuba. And so I'm like, there's all this cultural history missing when you just say African dance or West African dance. And so for me, being passionate about world dance, oh, okay, that's not for me. All right, great. So for me, being passionate about world dance representation is helping teachers and practitioners connect back to those roots. You know, the fact that every dance you're teaching has a story, has a history, and being able to identify where it came from and not erasing the people and also not erasing the elements that make the dance what it is really, you know, what makes the dance rich and important.
Thank you so much for all those beautiful responses. And, you know, before we go any further, let's address the elephant in the room here, which is, what do you think about the terminology world dance? And I'll say, like, let me throw that back to you, Damilare. What are your thoughts on it?
Sure. So when I hear world dance, that immediately tells me otherness, right? The fact that we know ballet, tap, jazz, and all the other like Western developed dances that have specific names. And then there's all this whole other dance traditions that we're going to call world dance, whether they're from Southeast Asia or from Africa or whatever. So when I think of that, then again, otherness. And so while right now it works to bring the conversation into this dance spaces, that there are other dances beyond just Western dance tradition, I look forward to a time where we can move away from that term and identifying the specific dances based on their culture and history.
Ted and Kara, what would you like to add?
I'd love to add on to that. I'm thinking actually of previous events in this wonderful series. I had the pleasure of attending Mars Sapphore's talk the other day, as well as a few other talks about, it was titled No White Woman's Tears Here. And from that talk, I think folks were mentioning the different strategies dance departments, institutions of dance are using to move away from world dance as a subject, because just as Damilare said, the term world dance tends to, it others dance forms that are outside of, that are not placed or specifically tied to Europe or the West. So some great strategies I heard yesterday were categorizing or getting specific about their function. Are they derived from religious or spiritual dances? Are they social or vernacular forms? Are they popular dances or designed for commercial use for film? Are they classical dances? Both ballet and Bharatanatyam are classical dances. So some dance departments are no longer requiring, you must take ballet, you must take West African. They're placing their requirements based on the function of the dance. And I think that's really exciting and a more specific and inclusive way to go forward, rather than relying on world dance, which is just code for non-Western dance.
I really don't have a whole lot to add to what Kara and Damilare said. I think that they hit the nail on the head. Whenever I hear world dance, just to de-academize myself, I just think of, oh, are you talking about brown people dancing? Because that's what it sounds like. So to put it very bluntly, I think it does take away from the richness and the diversity of the art forms that we're talking about. The type of art form that I do is very much associated with rural communities versus more urban communities. And there are hierarchies within South Indian dances. And to just kind of clump us into one group kind of takes away from that richness, but also takes away from the ways that things are hierarchized and the ways that certain art forms are diminished even within local communities. And it prevents that kind of discussion that could happen about how dances function among different communities within the same space.
Yes, it's part of the reason too why in the book we wanted not just dance styles represented that people that aren't as people that don't understand the importance of moving away from that terminology, but we wanted a whole, like all the dances represented. So there are also, there's a lot about ballet, for instance. There's a few stories about ballet that come in, or modern dancing. And it's because, dance is a vehicle and it doesn't really matter what type of dance. And so many times we rely on like the status quo of what's moving forward, of how we talk about things. And we just can't do that anymore. Like just because there's a critical mass of this language use or that terminology use, like we can't depend on it anymore. And I saw that come up in the book several times too, when there was words like mesmerized. Like sometimes somebody would say like, I saw them dance and I was mesmerized. And it was like, nope, we can't use that. We can't, like, even though this is a word that we often use to express wonder, like it can often create that othering effect. And so I think we'll discuss more about this as we move into some of the further questions, but really looking at whether the terms we use and the vocabulary we use is furthering the mission to honor all types of dances and to bring legitimacy to them. For me, since I am a lover of American vernacular jazz dances, I've studied a lot of West African dance and specifically Guinea dance. And, when the Guinea ballet, it was the first national ballet in all of Africa, they named it Les Ballets Africains, Les Ballets. And they did that because they wanted to show that it had as much credibility and value as Western style dances, but they felt they had to do that. And so this stuff has been around for a really long time. And I'm so glad that there's much more of a movement to start to get rid of it. So the next question I'll throw to the panelists. Damilare, this question is for you. So why is travel to local communities where dances were born critical in dance education?
Thank you, Megan. The reason I think it's important to travel to the local communities where dance was born is the context, the community, the political influences, the social, the religious, all of that. You can't really get to engage with that except you travel to the local places. And also it helps you see and participate in those activities of daily life that gave birth to those dances. So I think about some of the dances from the southern part of Nigeria, the Shakiri, they're primarily fishermen and fisherwomen, the dances. So when you see the hands go, this is really they paddling their boat, side and side. And so when you learn the dance and you're doing this and this, of course, anyone could learn that movement, but then there's a different way you embody it when you visually in your mind think of, okay, there's my canoe, I'm moving forward, and then you're dancing along. There is that, or when you think about the Yoruba, which is the Southwest dances in Nigeria, and the Bata, and the language that is represented in the drumming, that is then represented in the movement. So when you see those layers, so once you just see the movement and learn the movement alone, you don't get that multi-layer. And so, for example, in one of the movements of the Bata dance is like what is called Abula Meta. And so the drama goes dun 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 dun. And so that means make the movements in threes and then stomp and stomp. And so the dancer hears that dun 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 dun. So that is the shoulder back, and then together, either way. But then when I'm learning a dance and I'm just doing this and that, again, like the richness, the culture, the roots, like everything that makes the dance what it is absent. And so it's just mere movement without everything that makes it. And so I think that's very, very important that we travel to the local communities where these dances are born so that we get everything we're missing. And I think I can add lastly that it also creates reverence for the dance because, yeah.
Say a little bit more about that last piece, Damilare, that felt rich.
Okay. So because dance in many local communities are beyond just movement. there is the religious part of it, there's the community and social part of it. Traveling to the local community, like I said earlier on, helps you understand that, and you just give respect to it, right? When I said word reverence, you understand that maybe, and maybe Ted can jump in when he says this, because we've probably learned a lot of South Indian dances related to like temples and like actually being born out of that, and so having an opportunity to travel somewhere in India to learn those dances and connecting to whatever temple it came out from makes you treat that dance with respect. And that's what I meant when I said going to the community helps you create reverence for the dance.
I love that. And I saw you nod, Ted. What came up for you as Damilare was sharing?
Huh. Well, I think that all of your comments, Damilare, about context and histories is so important. And that's something I agree with wholeheartedly. I think for me, specifically in my own work in anthropology, is it helped me complicate these kind of dominant pictures of what a place is, including their, performance landscapes. I think that it's very easy for me to have gone to South India and be like, oh, it's very gender segregated here. I noticed that, in sections of the bus, like there are only women sitting there, there are only single men sitting there, and then there are some families over here. And it's really easy to get wrapped up into, okay, these are what the ideologies are, and people just live by them. And that's it. But when you get to know a dance in its local context, you see that people are not passive recipients to power, and that they actually can use performance in interesting and intricate ways to challenge dominant ideologies, to maybe rework them a little bit. They have a space to do that, which is maybe something that they wouldn't do on a public bus. But it is a space where this dynamic reworking of ideologies is happening. And I mentioned a little bit that, Karagattam, it often involves a little bit of playfulness, a little bit of lewdness. There is a specific act that one of my teachers, who was trans, taught me, which involved cutting a banana placed over an audience member's genitals. And that is something that you would not see a female-bodied person doing in day-to-day life. But this was the space that my guru could actually do that. And it just goes to show you that through these performances in the local context, you can really see how people are reworking the systems around them every day. And you can create those intimate connections with other dancers that allow them to explain how and why they're doing that on their own terms.
Is there anything you'd like to add, Kara?
I love that. I love that point, Ted. And one thing I'm also thinking about is how travel to the places where the dance is alive and practiced out in the community or in specific groups undoes this idea of scarcity. So in Filipino American communities, there's a history of cultural performance called the PCN, or the Filipino Cultural Night. And a common myth for young people in the diaspora is that certain dances are dying, certain dances are changing irrevocably from their original intent, or they're disappearing in some way. And while it's well-intentioned, while the idea to preserve or conserve certain dance forms, keep them the way they are is well-intentioned, my experience going to Manila helped me undo this idea of scarcity, that dances are not alive, that Pangala in particular is not no longer living, but a preserved dance form. Because by saying it's dead or it's no longer changing, it also says that the community who created the form collectively, who continues to innovate within that form, is disappearing as well. So the narrative that this dance is disappearing told me that this community is also disappearing, and that's simply not true, and contributes to the cultural displacement, not only the physical displacement, but the cultural displacement of an entire region, of an entire group of people who are very much alive and innovating, practicing, making this dance form truly alive and important.
I'm seeing a lot of nods in the audience. Seems like what you guys are saying is really resonating for folks. So the next question that I'll invite is a question for Kara. And Kara, what is the role of writing in an anti-racist dance classroom?
I love this question because I was recently on the other side of this. I was recently on the side of a participant in a dance classroom rather than someone who's facilitating a learning space. One thing I found really helpful, and I'll cite Andrew Suseno of Park on Resilience, as well as Nora Chipalmire, who came to Oberlin College to give a winter term intensive, that the dance writing practice can really support a learning space and orient it towards anti-racist principles. So I want to qualify that it's not the same as dismantling the structure of racism just by implementing certain strategies in the classroom. But in my experience, dance and writing together can help orient the classroom structurally towards an anti-racist practice. And I'm drawing also from the recent book, The Anti-Racist Writing Workshop, as well as some of my mentors at Oberlin College and Cooper Albright and Alicia Ramos. So one strategy for dance writing in a learning space is to open that space, whether it's a choreographic process, a studio class, or a critical inquiry class where the focus is on learning dance history. Open that learning space by creating some community guidelines, and not just writing those community guidelines by sitting down at a table, but taking a large sheet of paper or a whiteboard out into a studio space where there's space to move, and model for students that this is a space where we can think through the body. And that begins with our community guidelines. So the community guidelines are shaped and determined by the students. So rather than the instructor or the facilitator using a command approach, determining this is what we do, this is how we'll function, this is how you should communicate, and how I should hold you accountable. The students get to contribute to the community guidelines to say, when we notice something's wrong, this is how we'll hold you accountable. This is how we're going to hold each other accountable. These are some of the values we share in this space, and these are some of the things we want to acknowledge in our space, including mixed abilities, different ethnic and educational backgrounds, different forms of communication. So some examples, I want to give some concrete examples there. Students might put on their community guidelines, move forward and move back. And that means being aware of how you're moving into the space or showing up in the space, contributing your ideas. And if you're aware that you're taking up a lot of space, that's the phrase that students use, or you're speaking up a lot or moving a lot, taking up physically a lot of space, and other students may want to move into that space with you, you can choose to move back for a moment, make that choice to move back so that other students feel emboldened or encouraged to step in. I also heard yesterday that educators can explicitly say, if I misstep, if I say something or use the wrong terminology or bring a perspective into the class that's actually harmful, I welcome you to speak to me or share it with the class or message me in some way. This can also go on the community guidelines. And once folks have shared their ideas, giving space also to move, to improvise, and allow students to feel what those values and community guidelines feel like in their bodies. I think this communicates that the learning space is shared, it's created collectively, and that ideas are valued not only in the way they're phrased, but also in the way they're embodied. So the community guideline is not just a document, but something that we must move into collectively. And that's really the core and the power of a dance learning space, right? Is that we not only share ideas, but we're practicing how we embody them, we move them into action. That's what's really special to me about a dance space.
What I'm appreciating about your share, Kara, is how writing things down gives us clarity. And by creating those explicit agreements around how we're behaving, the values that we're holding, how we move through a dance class, or the way that we talk about dances that are from cultures other than our own, etc., like that, having this clarity really helps. One thing I'd love to add that around how writing supports cultivating more awareness is this idea of positionality statements, and how your first draft of anything is going to illuminate a lot and can be an amazing tool for finding your blind spots as a student or as an educator. So, you write a first draft, and then you have someone come in and look through it as to like, hey, if we're really going for representing, my time dancing in this country in a way that is respectful and caring, what am I missing? And it might be things like language, like there might accidentally be some microaggressions in there that you never would have thought of because they're just blind spots. We don't always know what we don't know. I wish we did, but it's so nice to have other pairs of eyes. Or one of the very illuminating parts in this book was that the perspective consultant was saying, it's interesting, the BIPOC contributors, you always know their background when they're writing about being in another culture. Like, they're making it explicit who they are and the lens through which they are interpreting what's happening there. And none of the white authors did it. And this is not to say that the white authors are bad or wrong, right? It's just to say that the way that she explained it to me was like, a lot of times white people aren't used to explaining themselves. It's a part of our privilege. It's a part of our total blind spots. And so the idea that we might have to say, oh yeah, I am, a white woman born to a middle-class family in California, and that is the lens by which I'm exploring Ghanaian culture in West Africa, like, it really matters. So making sure that students are getting a chance to look at each other's work, are getting a chance to white students are working with BIPOC students, and like there's a difference of like diversity of how people are exchanging information. Like, there's things that people from different backgrounds are going to catch because we all have blind spots. All right, the last question of the panel, I'm sending it over to you, Ted. And that is, how do we ensure we cultivate thoughtful scholars of dance?
Thank you, Meg. I actually was thinking about this question earlier today, and I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer it, to be quite honest. I don't know if I'm a scholar of dance. And I think one of the things in these panel settings where we're expected to be the experts is just to be honest sometimes and be able to say, I'm not sure I know the full answer to that. But I kind of reframed the question a little bit in my own mind. And I was thinking about how can dance cultivate thoughtful scholars? So kind of turning it around a little bit. And I think that there are plenty of ways that I've done this as an anthropology instructor for ethnographic methods courses, and also just in my own anthropological practice. One of the things that I've noticed just in my own career as a researcher is when I first was, out in the field at the age of 20 on a study abroad program, I just assumed that the only data that mattered was the data that was written down by someone somewhere in some kind of archive, or it was the data that I could count. Like, I could say, oh, there were 15 people in the audience for that. Like, somehow these numbers or somehow this written word that I can cite is the only data I should be looking for. And that's something that has really evolved over time as I have become a more well-rounded performer, but also as I have studied more performance studies scholarship as well. And there is so much meaning that someone can convey to you by raising their eyebrows, by smirking, and that gets lost when you're just looking for written data. That gets lost when you are trying to count something in a room. So I would definitely say that, but I also don't want to reduce performance and dance to data, because we have to look at it a little bit more broadly, and it is in and of itself its own epistemology. It is a way of sharing and conveying knowledge that is often undermined, especially in academic spaces. And it was a very interesting experience for me to try to write a dissertation when I make the argument that we should be de-hierarchizing knowledge and making the written word not the supreme form of knowledge that everybody goes off of. But I think it is important, especially when we're talking about writing, it's like, how do we give primacy to movement and embodiment? And this is not an easy thing. Dance performance is ephemeral. It's not something that's going to be easily replicated. And even if you record it somehow, some way, you're losing some of that context. And it can be messy also to try to attribute meaning to certain things when you might not necessarily have the same cultural knowledge as the person who is doing the embodied movement. But that doesn't mean that that can't be the beginning point of a dialogue. And I think that when we're trying to just use what's written and when we're trying to use what we can count, we almost want to put a period at something. Whereas embodied movement can create the beginning of a dialogue where you're actually consulting with the person. And you're also doing it on their own terms in a better way. One of the things that, I did the whole anthropology thing, and I have moved to a more administrative track. And one of the reasons I did it is because I was writing about how a trans community translated themselves through performance to a larger audience. And I made a decision based on my own, thoughts and ideas of, I feel like my voice has been put into this through my dissertation, and I've made that as publicly accessible as possible. I think it's time to allow them to continue to do what they're doing. And maybe I can take a step back rather than trying to build off of this in order to form an academic career out of it. And that's a personal decision. And I don't blame anyone who continues to do the work, because there is clear investment in that. But what I will say is a lot of anthropological work is people trying to translate other people. And when people are translating themselves so beautifully, we have to give them the space to do that. And I think performance is a primary medium through which they can do that.
Thank you. So I want to open it up for Q&A. I've seen some questions have already come in. So we'll start with Donna's question. And then if other folks want to throw a question into the chat box, we'll just go in the order that they arrive. I'm also going to throw in a link to the book in case you guys want to check it out. So Donna, is it possible for students to absorb cultural meaning through the learning of form, step, rhythms, etc.? Is this a general panel question, or is there someone in particular you'd like to hear from?
Well, anyone who'd love to speak to it.
I can go because I talked a lot about traveling to the community and learning about the dance. And my answer would be, it's a step in the right direction, but not absolutely absorb. And why I say that is, when I think of mastery of anything, I think of it from three perspectives, right? There's intellectual mastery, there's the emotional mastery, and the physical mastery, which is the embodiment of it. And so when you teach something in the classroom, it tends to lean more on the intellectual part of it. So they may know the cultural meaning, but until they've experienced the multi-sensoriality of the dance in the community and space, then they're missing the sights, the sounds, the smell, the taste, like everything that adds up to making up that dance. When I talk about a fisherman's dance, for example, like, yeah, until you've smelled the water and the fish is in the water and all of that being there, you're not embodying a fisherman's dance, because and also there's that goes into a whole different conversation about bringing dances from community context onto stage. That's also another thing. I'm not going to go down that route right now, but it's a step in the right direction to teach forms, steps, and rhythms, unless and until students experience the cultural setting. There's a missing piece. Really, there is.
What other questions do we have?
While we wait for the questions, I was going to make a comment about cultivating dance scholars that was just talked about by Ted. And the thing that rings for me is suspending judgment, staying curious, right? And that's really just asking a lot of questions, because the tendency of dancing and learning choreography is just to learn the movement for whatever we need it for, right? A performance, a display, a class. Whereas when we suspend judgment, it means to forget everything you may already know or learn about that dance or movement, and then ask questions. Why am I doing this movement? What might it mean? And how am I then expressing that in my intention? That's the thoughtfulness in being a dance scholar, because all of that then comes into how you're writing the dance, how you're performing it, and how you're showing up.
Yeah, I mean, just to jump off of that, also, I think that performance allows for polyvocality. It's not just one singular voice. I've had 3 different Karagattam teachers over my time, and I have asked the same question as them. Like, okay, this teacher told me this. I'm just going to ask the same question again. And I've gotten different answers for different things, but I've also had a cis male teacher. I've had a cis female teacher, and I've had a trans teacher. So they all come from different sectors and, populations and background lived experiences in South India, and they interpret things differently. And I think that it's very easy to try to find a single truth behind a certain dance form or a certain type of performance. And I think that the polyvocality of it all, the complicatedness of it, it can feel a little messy at time when you're trying to argue something and you're trying to make a very cohesive argument throughout an entire dissertation. But I think that's what makes it so rich. And I think that's the challenge that we should be adopting.
I was just going to share that, or put out there, I guess, that it's not always practical or possible or affordable, right, to go to a community and, right. So, for example, we have a study abroad program in Guinea, and we've run it for several years. Of course, we've had to put it on pause for the last couple of years. However, 2 people went the first year. 4 people were signed up, but then couldn't afford to make it happen. You know what I mean? So it's running into obstacles, and so we perhaps can't solve that right now. But I'm wondering, like, this conversation makes me think, like, I wonder if there are steps to getting there, right? Like, perhaps the class who is taught in our faculty, on our faculty by someone from Guinea, perhaps it's co-taught with an anthropology professor, and that both the students are experiencing the dance but also learning about the culture simultaneously, right? And there is a context segment to that course, or to those courses, because of who teaches it. But that's because we happen to be lucky, and he happens to live in Rochester, and we happen to be able to get him on our faculty, and we can't do that with every form. And so I'm wondering, like, what are the intermediate steps that we can take until, like, it's the way we really want it to be, right?
Thank you for asking that, Missy. Yes, you can definitely teach the courses together with an anthropology professor. One thing that was done when I was in Hungary was they brought the villagers from Visha, which is another village in Romania, to Hungary, and we did this whole 5-day, dance intensive with the villagers, where in the mornings we spend time in interviews, right? Talking to them, asking, understanding the dance movement and all of that. And in the evenings, we did practicals, learning the dance, and they could easily refer, like what we talked about in the morning in terms of this dance, here's how they're demonstrating that. And so if that were another opportunity too, that's an intermediate, right? When the students gonna go there, you can bring some of the practitioners from those local communities. And particularly in this case, they didn't even bring professional dancers. They brought everyday people, like granddads and moms and people who live in the community who also grew up learning the dance to bring their perspective, and share with us. And so it wasn't coming from a very codified dance, syllabus perspective. It was coming from, this is my day-to-day life and community and learning dance, and this is how I share and express that. So that's another intermediary.
I'd also love to add that part of my experience was learning that there's not just one source for Pangalai based in Manila, but that there's an entire collectively community-based archive on YouTube. And something I've been interested in is, Missy, I'm so glad you brought this up, because I was thinking very similarly, wow, I had this amazing experience to travel, but there are so many other folks just like me who don't have this opportunity. And we know the importance of going to the site and learning firsthand, but how many students actually get to do that? And given the current circumstances, almost all travel, well, many travel opportunities have been on hold. So I've been thinking a lot about this video archive. It's literally a YouTube channel called Triple H Tausug channel. And it's recordings of performances at weddings, Pangalai performance at weddings, all across Sulu Archipelago, parts of Kalimantan, Indonesia, parts of Malaysia as well, where Tausug communities live. And this is an archive I didn't know about. I conducted an entire project about Pangalai without knowing about this resource. And I wonder about, I just think it's a really wonderful place to look, maybe showing students that there are popular sites, there are popular places where dance is being shown. They're just not the institutionalized or codified forms, and that we can start there, because I stepped into Pangalai thinking, oh, there's only this one group, and to really learn, I have to go to them and only them. But now, I'll wrap this up. Now I know that there's an entire different side of Pangalai, and it's a wealth of videos on YouTube that were just dismissed by this codified group, this particular group in Manila. So I'll stop there.
Well, we're so grateful for your attendance today, and we're really excited. The book Dance Adventures is currently a finalist for the Ruth Lovell Murray Book Award through NDEO, so that's really cool. It's been, I know I'm excited about it, and the teachers that I've talked to, including a woman at Ball State who's going to be using it in her curriculum, there really, before this, haven't been a lot of engaging first-person storytelling narratives that also pay a lot of attention to representation and culture. And that are educational, rich and educational. And Damilare, Kara, Ted, all the other authors did such an incredible job at writing these stories. We're really proud of how everything turned out. And it's so fun to share a little bit of that with you here. So again, I'll throw a link to the book in the chat in case you want to check it out. And if you do end up using it in curriculum, please let us know. We get so excited about it, celebrate it, enjoy it. We'd love to hear what your students think. And we hope you all have a beautiful rest of the conference and a great day.
Thank you all for coming. We have a great lineup today of other sessions too. We thank you so much for your time, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you. Bye-bye.